Ray Suarez is a colorectal cancer survivor. He just finished his 8-part podcast series called The Things I Thought About When My Body Was Trying to Kill Me. The podcast deals with diagnosis, treatment, and recovery from cancer. Ray, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story.
Great to be with you.
So, take us back to the beginning. Did you have symptoms? When did this all start for you?
Well, I guess the first time I realized something was wrong was when I was on a 275-mile bike ride with my son. And normally, this wouldn't have been a big deal at all, but I was really struggling.
Bicycle or
And
motorcycle? Oh
bicycle.
my God.
And it hit me that this was much harder than it should have been. I had no idea why, but I was coming to the end of a very tough year. Tremendous stress, lots of setbacks, personally and professionally, money problems pursuant to the professional problems. So I chalked it up to that. And, obviously you're getting older, so you think, well, maybe this was just a little bit too audacious to try to do this 275-mile bike ride. But really, that was the first sign. But I pushed it to the back of my mind. I had too many things going on. I moved. I rented my house. I began a job teaching at Amherst College in Massachusetts. And the stress and the sleeplessness and the fatigue never really left, even though I wasn't trying to ride a bike 55 miles a day for 5 days in a row anymore. So
You're
I,
scaring me. You
again,
just described what's going on with me. So it's scaring me a
well,
little bit.
I chalked it all up. I chalked it all up to age, stress, and personal setbacks. I really was, chewing this over, ruminating, angry all the time.
Okay.
What I really just should have done was gone to the doctor, but I eventually did.
How long ago was this?
This was 4 years ago.
So, in addition to the fatigue and the sleeplessness, I think you mentioned, what other symptoms did you have or begin to have?
Those were really the only signs that something was wrong. And toward the end of this window, I started to have gastro symptoms. So I was getting heartburn and reflux, and these were not things that I had to deal with in the past, not things that I had experienced in the past. So I was chewing Tums and trying to exercise enough to make myself exhausted so I would fall asleep at night, and that wasn't working. My eyes would open up, and I'd be walking around the house at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I finally was starting to concede that something was really wrong with me. I had to move again, and it was when I was unpacking from the second move that a wave of fatigue, it felt like my whole body was being swept away by this incredible exhaustion while I was carrying a box of books up the stairs. Totally unlike me, totally unlike anything I had ever experienced before. And I just admitted to myself that I was really sick and went to an internist fairly quickly. And before long, he called back. They took a blood test and did a history. And my wife answered the phone, and internist says, "Hi, it's Dr. Thatchett. What's your husband doing?" And she said, "Well, he's moving furniture and unloading books because we just moved." And he said, "Tell him to stop. Tell him to stop doing that and to sit down. You've got to take him to an emergency room right away. He needs an emergency blood transfusion and a bag of iron. His hemoglobin is 5.3, and it should be 15 for a man my age." He says, "I don't even know how he was doing all that. He should have been lightheaded and needing to get onto a couch if he stood up too quickly."
Right. Oh
But
my
somehow
gosh.
I was pushing through. It was mind over matter.
Right.
And we headed to the nearest emergency room, spent the night standing around getting my blood typed again and again and getting the donor blood typed again and again. They finally got it into my arm, got some iron into my arm. And naturally, by the next morning, I felt better. But that obviously was not the answer to what was wrong with me. Proceeded directly to a gastroenterologist. She said, "You're going to need an endoscopy and you're going to need a colonoscopy." And I said to her, "Well, doctor, what are the possibilities? What's the list of things that we're looking at here?" And she looked at me and said, "Well, it's not really a list. You've either got a bleeding ulcer or cancer." And it was as stark as that.
Wow.
And as I say in my podcast, it was the only time in my life I had ever wished I had a bleeding ulcer. So,
Right? I mean, totally. Like, what? Oh my gosh. I almost appreciate that though, right? This sort of black and white, because most doctors are sort of wishy-washy and
no,
af-
she was straightforward, no beating around the bush. She
wow.
said, as straight as that. It's not really a list. There's just two things. And sure enough, in a couple of days, the pathology report was back from the tissue samples from the polyps that she had found. And I had two tumors, one in my ascending colon and one in my transverse colon. And I was going to have them out as soon as possible. I had another blood transfusion. And that wasn't really to cure my anemia as much as to get me well enough to go under the knife. They
Yeah.
were afraid to operate on me in the condition that I was in. So
Yeah, of
we
course.
started to take care of that. And a couple of weeks later, checked into Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital in New York City, one of the great cancer hospitals in the world, and went in with a colon and came out with a semicolon.
As a writer, I really appreciate that. So I'm curious, just because you were in Amherst, how come you didn't go to one of the many amazing medical centers in Boston?
Well, just on the cusp of getting this diagnosis, we moved from Amherst to Philadelphia. So Temple
Oh,
was literally right around the corner. And so I ended up getting much of my treatment there, and then getting a recommendation, as often happens, a line on a great surgeon, and ended up at Sloan Kettering.
got it. So, what stage was the cancer?
3B/C.
Oh
And
boy.
this is one of the great frustrations of this whole journey, is that you never can know everything you want to know when you want to know it. There's always the answer to one question that's after over the next mountain and in the next valley. You have to wait for this test or wait for this screen or wait for this assessment. And sure enough, after I had these tumors removed, well, I said, "Well, doc, how are we?" And he says, "Well, I can't tell you yet. We found that your tumors had penetrated the wall of your colon. So, as a precaution, we took the adjacent lymph nodes out, and we're going to have to look at those to see if there are any cancer cells in those." And out of the 36 lymph nodes that they took adjacent to the colon, there was cancer in three of them. So that meant chemotherapy. That meant that they were still optimistic about my recovery, still pretty positive about my prognosis because of my underlying, what they perceived as my underlying health. But it was going to be a more complicated recovery than if they had taken those lymph nodes and found nothing had moved there.
Right. What was the chemotherapy like and how long did you have to do it?
Well, the journey to chemo was interesting because you are faced then with the lovely paradox of having to get well, recover from surgery in order to start making yourself sick again. And I sat with the oncologist and he said, well, look, you've got two choices. There are two indicated chemotherapies for your kind of cancer. One is called Folfox. It's a combination of two drugs. And one is called Capox, and that's short for capecitabine and oxaliplatin. He said that one was longer and one was shorter. I said, well, why would anyone choose the longer one? He said, well, the longer one is less toxic. I said, oh, all right. Well, now that makes sense. He says, yeah, but the longer one is emerging from the data to also be less effective. So why would you do it longer and less effective? Well, only because you don't want to be as sick. And he says
Right,
sometimes in older patients, Capox is just a lot for them to handle and they just can't do it. And I would
right.
recommend for them Folfox, but for you, and this was one of those moments where talking with a generational peer, he was almost exactly my age, was helpful. We looked at each other across the desk, and I said, well, if you had this stage of cancer, if you had just had this surgery, which one would you do? And he said, absolutely no question, Capox. And so that was it, Capox. 4 months.
I love that he gave you an answer. So far, I'm loving your doctors
Yeah,
because,
they are.
again,
They were terrific. They were
that's
absolutely
a
terrific.
that's a
Uh,
question a lot of doctors won't answer. You know
or
what I
they
mean?
beat
Because they're
around the
so
bush
afraid.
because they want it to be
Right.
your decision. But
That's right.
these
Exactly.
people were very straightforward with me. And
That's
who knows,
awesome.
maybe 40 years of being a reporter and asking a lot of questions had me asking the questions in the right way to get it to elicit an answer. But either way, I got great
Right.
answers from my doctors, very straightforward, very concrete, and also gave you the grounding to make the decisions for yourself that you had to make. In the case of Capox, it was a dual drug therapy. So you were taking 2,000 milligrams a day of capecitabine, which is a very toxic drug, um, 4 tablets in the morning and 4 tablets at night, 500 milligrams each.
Whew.
And then uh, every 3 weeks, an infusion of oxaliplatin, which also is incredibly toxic. And he warned me that the effect was not level, it was cumulative. So after every round of pills and after every infusion, I would feel worse and worse until it
Right.
crescendoed at the end and I'd feel worst of all. But, you know, you you have to assess for yourself what you think you can handle, whether you think it's worthwhile to try to get through this quicker rather than slower, and to assess what your odds are if you don't do it. And he was very
Right.
straightforward about that too. He said, look, right now, you would be called cancer free. We've done several diagnostic tests. These were the only places in your body where we found cancerous cells. We took them out. So now it actually is in your choice to not do chemotherapy at all.
Oh. Oh,
He said, I
interesting.
would,
So he said
you know,
this,
you're cancer free, but we don't
but
know what's lurking. You know, 1 cell here, 2 cells there. We don't know what's lurking
right.
somewhere in your body. There's just no way to know. So I would recommend that you do chemotherapy, but it's not absolutely required. And that gave me, you know, obviously a lot to think about, but also the feeling that they were being very straight with me. And I had a
Yeah.
basis on which to move ahead, feeling like I was doing the right thing for myself. And I did.
So talk to me a little bit about those 4 months of chemotherapy and the effects of it getting worse. What was that like for you?
Well, you read, you know, every drug, even a bottle of aspirin comes with
Oh, yeah.
that little piece of paper with the tiny, tiny type describing what your possible side effects may be. And I looked
That
over,
I need glasses and a magnifying
yeah,
glass just
right.
to read
Well,
these days.
I
It's
looked
like,
over that fearsome set of side effects. And, you know, they're graded. So the ones at the top are the ones that are most frequently experienced by people who take the drugs. And then once you get down to the bottom, there were only a couple of cases of this, but they are obliged by law to tell you about them. But the list together between the two drugs was horrifying, absolutely horrifying. And so you have to approach this with a kind of discipline and also a suspension of obsession with comfort. You have to decide for yourself that you're going to kind of detach from constantly checking yourself, as is human
Mm.
nature. After you've just had abdominal surgery and you've got this scar running up your belly and you don't feel so great, but you've got to stop that constantly checking in with yourself. Yes, you should be aware of what's going on with yourself, but you can't be obsessive about it because it's up to you to keep on taking the drugs. You know, the gold standard for difficult medicine is something called DOT, directly observed therapy, where if a patient is on a tuberculosis drug that makes them very ill, an HIV drug where the side effects are terrible and they're afraid that if they just give you the pills and send you home, you won't take them, they make you come into the doctor's office to take it, and a doctor or a nurse watches you. Well, here I was after covering stories like that for years, knowing that DOT was the big deal, and instead they sent me packages of chemo in the mail. A courier came to my house and brought them, and it would arrive in a
These are the
hazmat
pills,
package.
right?
Right, the pills would arrive in a
Yep.
hazmat package with a symbol on it, with a skull and crossbones, saying,
Yep.
"Absolutely be terribly careful when you get rid of these pills." And I'm looking at the wrapper thinking, oh, I know how I'll get rid of them. I'll swallow them.
It's so true, and people who haven't experienced it, I mean, if it's an infusion, the nurse comes in like a hazmat
Right.
suit. It's crazy.
They
It's great,
introduced
and there
that
is a school.
protocol halfway through my treatment. So the first two visits, she just comes in, looks for my port, swabs the alcohol, punctures me, and the line's in, and that's it. The last two times, she came in a hazmat suit, and the IV pole was all wrapped in plastic, and you had to strain to see the meters through the plastic. They were protecting themselves from what they were putting in my body, which is
It's
astonishing. You think,
nuts.
all right, well, now I'm going to sit here. And I said to the doctor, well, I guess every now and then I'll go into the hospital, they'll put a line in my arm and put this stuff in me. And he said, oh, no, this is so toxic that you have to have a port into your vena cava. It would wreck every blood vessel in your arm if we put it in your
Yeah.
arm. And the weird thing was, I was, I'm, well, it would be an exaggeration to say jolly, but I was resigned to having the surgery to have my tumors removed. And I was a good boy, and I did what I was told, and I followed instructions and all of that. Getting the port put in my chest drove me crazy, bonkers, in a way that
Why?
having surgery for the tumors didn't. I was in a freezing room, and in order to uh, expose your upper chest to put in the port, they cover your face. And when they put the disinfectant on and arranged all the sheets and towels around the area where they're going to open me up, the last thing they did was put a cover over my face. And for some reason, I was so amped up. I was so crazy at that moment that having that thing put over my face just made me nuts.
Is this when they inserted the port? Like
Yes.
actually,
And I
okay.
said, okay, well, where's the doctor? Let's do this thing already. And they said, oh, Mr. Suarez, we're really sorry. The doctor's running late on the previous procedure, but he'll be here soon. I said, okay, that's fine. Just take this thing off my face then until he gets here. Oh, I'm
Right.
sorry. I'm sorry. We can't do that. So I'm laying there like with a cover on my face and getting more and more anxious and agitated and
Yeah.
unhappy. And I said, "Look, can you give me something? I don't know why. Give me an Ativan or something. Can you just give
Right,
me
that's what
something?"
I was about to say.
And they said, "No, well, if we gave you something now, it wouldn't take effect yet in time for the doctor to be here." I said, "Okay, then just knock me out and I'll just be out until he gets here and does what he's got to do." "No, well, since we don't know exactly when he's going to be here, we don't want to put you out either." So I'm laying there on the table, freezing, crazy, and I've got a shroud on my face, and now my arm is itchy. So I said to the nurse, "Look, I'm just going to scratch my arm." Because one arm is trussed, because they don't want me to move because they're
Right.
going to put this thing in my shoulder. And so I got to scratch my face. I have an itch on my face where you've got this thing on my face. And she says, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Suarez. Here, I'll scratch your face." Now, if you've ever had anybody in life try to scratch an itch that you have, they never get it. They never get the right
No, of course
place
not.
and they get the right
Even if
amount
you're
of
guiding them.
scratchy or anything. So she, being a nurse, covers her finger in a towel or something and starts to gently massage my cheek. I said, "No, no, my face really itches and I'm going to scratch my face." "No, you can't do that." I said, "Well, let's get the doctor in here and knock me out and put this thing in me." "No, well, he's not here yet." So I laid there very quietly and waited till everybody in the room was off doing other things, chatting somewhere else in the room. And I reached up with the arm that had a line in it and started scratching my face. And I got admonished by the nurse, scolded for scratching my
No.
face. I said,
Oh my
"I gotta
God,
get
this
the
is
hell out of
so
here. This is not making me happy." And before too long, the thing was in my chest and I was coming to and walking out of the place. I walk in, my wife's in the waiting room. She says, "What happened to you? This was supposed to take 15 minutes. I said, "Oh, it's a long tale of woe. I'll tell you in the car. I got to get out of Let me out of here." It was really made me crazy. And it's funny, you never
it
you never
sounds
know what's
crazy.
going to get to you. If this is all new, I've never had a medical procedure before. I've never been an inpatient in a hospital before in my life. I've never had anything serious happen to me. I've never been opened up. All of this was new. And I was, up until that moment, a pretty good boy. but, but right at that point, I thought, this is making me crazy. They got to take this thing off my face. Well, I had the port in. The port is a reminder. Every time you brush up
Right.
against it, every time you realize it's there, and when you're taking chemotherapy drugs that have a neurological effect, that make your nerve endings crazy, that light up the networks of nerves in your body, that incision also starts to feel intense pain. When I would start to get my infusions, right away, I would feel pain in that part of my chest because my nerve endings had been interfered with, messed with, insulted. But
Right.
along with the 900 other effects I was having, I guess that was just that was just one of the minor ones.
And you had those lines flushed every day, right?
No, I only had to have the line flushed every now and then.
Oh,
Yeah,
really? Interesting. Okay. All
because the
right.
port was not
Uh,
exposed; it was subcutaneous, and so um,
okay.
she would stick it
Okay.
through my skin into the mesh every time I would get an
Got it.
infusion.
I can't get over that story because it seems to me they forgot you were a person.
Yeah, things were, and every other part of the story, I have nothing but the highest praise for the medical professionals I worked with, their compassion, their decency, their care, their kindness. But this was a moment where everything that was happening for their convenience and not mine. And that was the moment where I thought, yeah, this is the kind of thing that makes people complain about the system.
Yeah. Was that your worst moment, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there were a lot of times of really bad physical problems, but uh, you kind of expected them. They were built into what was going on. This was an unnecessarily problematic moment, I guess.
What was your best moment in all of it?
The last day of the last bunch of pills, I looked down in the bottom of the pill bottle, and there were 4 pills left and 1 dose left. And I said to myself, I could just throw these in the garbage. I could flush them down the toilet. No one would know. I'm standing here by myself in the kitchen, and I've covered enough medicine over the years to know that the impact of these 4 pills is pretty marginal. Like whatever's going to happen to me at this point is likely going to happen. Recurrence, non-recurrence, long-term remission, or a problem right away. Nothing is hinging on these 4 pills. But up until that moment, I had done everything that the internist asked me to do. I had done everything that the gastroenterologist had asked me to do. I had done everything that the oncologist and the surgeon had asked me to do. And I thought, why wreck my perfect record now? I'll just swallow these last 4 pills. I'll feel terrible. And then tomorrow, little by little, I'll start feeling better. And instead of feeling like I was at the receiving end of coercion, I felt like I was actually making a choice for a change and choosing to do the right thing and choosing to be done. And now I was ready to begin being better.
Oh, I love that story. I have to ask you, so it sounds like you covered healthcare as a
I did
reporter.
many years covering healthcare, sure.
How do you think that impacted the way you went through
It
cancer?
moved a lot of the things that I had covered over the years from abstractions, and I'm a smart guy, so I understood what I was talking about all the years that I was doing stories on this stuff. So it wasn't like I was just making it up, but it is very
Sure.
different when it's your body and your side effects, and you're entering the belly of the beast as a patient and dealing with brusque receptionists and nurses who don't understand your question and doctors who are in a hurry and all the other things that are just part and parcel of the way we do this here in the United States. So um, my wife had had a very threatening brain tumor 10 years earlier. So that was only one
Oh my
level of
goodness.
remove, but I went through all that with her, her assessment, her surgery, her recovery. But again, it's not you. When it's you, it's very different. And it stops being
Yeah.
abstract and it continues to be a miracle. I had always appreciated it. I always appreciated what these people at various points in the chain do. But yeah, it is a whole other world when you wake up and you look down at your belly and there's all these tubes coming out of it. it it makes it realer than it ever was before.
I know an oncologist. So here is a doctor who's been treating cancer for over a decade. And when he was diagnosed with lymphoma, a cancer that he treated, he said he finally got it. He never understood why his patients didn't seem to, he thought they didn't listen to him, especially initially. He thought they just weren't paying attention, weren't listening, and he would get frustrated. And it wasn't until he received the same diagnosis that he had given so many times, and he was shell shocked for a solid week, for a whole week. And he knew all the ins and outs, and he knew exactly what his treatment was going to be. But he said he finally got it and realized, oh, my patients are just in total
Yeah,
shock.
it's
That's
like
all it is.
a sudden gush of water that's going to swamp your canoe. You have to sit upright in the boat. You got to keep that water out of there, and
That's a
you have you
great
have to
analogy.
keep from getting swept away. And I suppose depending on the diagnosis, and depending on the cancer, and depending on how advanced it is, depending on your prognosis, who could blame you if your canoe is swamped? If you just sort of throw up your hands and just figure, this is it, this is the end of my life. There are some cancers, as you know, that the chance of 2 year and 5 year survival is close to nil. And keeping hold of yourself after something like that is tremendously challenging, and takes a level of fortitude that maybe people all along the chain don't understand.
Yeah. Wow. Ray, what is one thing you wish you had known at the very beginning of your cancer journey?
I had to learn gradually to force myself to take it easy, and to force myself not to worry about all the things that I was worried about before my diagnosis. Getting better had to become job one. And I couldn't continue to tie myself in knots over some of this stuff. I just had to let it go. Very much unlike me,
Like what?
not me at all. So it may sound like an easy thing. Well, of course. I mean, you've got to take care of your health, and then worry about this other stuff after. Not something I'm good at. But when you're sitting chemoed out on the couch watching British crime procedurals, you have to think, all right, what can I do about my objective circumstances right now? Really in real life, nothing. And once you surrender to that, once you allow that to be the answer, you're on your way to a different kind of wisdom, I think. That's what worked for me anyway. I needed to find inner reserves of calm because I was tremendously angry after my diagnosis. Not frightened, but angry. Angry because I treasured a kind of control over my life, treasured the illusion, as it turns out, of being at the wheel of my ship. And for once in
Mm.
my life, I was no longer in control. I could do everything that I was told to do by my doctors and die. I could be a jerk because I just don't know how to react. I could do all kinds of things, but I was not in control of the outcome. I could assist. I could comply with the instructions I got to the degree possible, but I could not control the outcome, and I was ferociously angry. I had to, over time, let go of that. I had to stop looking for work like a frantic, crazy person. I had to let myself be taken care of, which was also really hard for me to do. And uh, that wisdom took some time, but it all arrived little by little till I was in a reasonably serene state by the end of it all, even though I felt absolutely awful, like just indescribably awful. That might have contributed to my feeling of, well, look, there's just so much I can do right now, and I've just gotta wait until I'm in some kind of shape to take more control over my life. Religion helped. Um,
Were you religious
yeah,
before?
yeah. But
Okay.
again, it's one of those things, moving from the abstract to the concrete. I went to church one Sunday morning, and I'm sitting there in the pew, and what's read out from the front of the church for that week's Old Testament lesson, but the story of Job. And I'm sitting there in the pew, listening to Job's story, Job who loses everything. And I've always taken it as a fable because I don't think I could actually be religious if it required believing in a God who sort of makes bets and says, all right,
Thank
take
you.
everything away from
Yes,
this guy and see how he reacts. That's not a God that I believe in.
exactly.
So, but I'm thinking about Joe. I said, Am I Job? Well, no. My family was fine. I still had the things that I had worked for all my life. I was sick like Job, but also talking a lot with my friends about what to make of my life. And I thought, well, Job's friends say to him, "Ah, come on, Job. Look, you were a good guy. You did everything you were supposed to do, and you look at what happened to you. How can you be a faithful guy?" And so you can either be Job or you can be Job's friends. And at that moment, I thought, I'm going to stick with trying to be Job instead of Job's friends. And it was one of those moments where I thought, all right, I can do this. I can get through this, just like Job. Like any good fable, it has a moral. It has some durable lessons in it. And that's why we still tell each other that story 3,000 years after it was written, and because of those durable truths that are in it.
Yeah. Wow. Have you ever read When Bad Things Happen to Good
I
People?
have, I have, and interviewed the
Yeah.
author.
Yeah. You
Yeah,
did? Ah, I love that book. I just love the way he talked about religion and praying to God when you have a catastrophic illness and also his personal experience. I mean, just loved it.
he,
Yeah.
and he is a corrective. He has to be a corrective to what I believe is the incorrect way that religion is often taught, where if you do these things won't happen to you, like it's some sort of
Right.
magic set of incantations that will protect you from all harm, when we know, as any grown-up knows, that that's not true, but we still deep down still harbor that idea, like, look, how could this thing happen to me? I did everything that I was told to do. I am proud that during the whole experience, I never, ever said to myself, why me? Because after all, why not me? If
Yeah.
tens of thousands of people are diagnosed with this particular ailment every year in America, like, why not me? It has, if it's going to be somebody, it could have been me, it could have been somebody else, but it would happen to be me. And the when bad things happen to good people is a reminder that, trying to hit all your marks and do the things that you think an upright person is supposed to do was never meant to be some sort of um, maker's warranty from the Almighty that nothing bad was going to happen to you. Where did you get that idea? And if you got that idea from somebody, drop it. It's not a workable
Right.
idea.
Oh gosh, you are so delightful and funny. Just so funny. If you could only do one thing to change healthcare in the US, what would it be and why?
I would make sure that people can get the help they need. Even now, with the Affordable Care Act, even now with widespread availability of private insurance, millions of people have no steady, reliable health care. And when I was getting a course of drugs that cost $48,000 for 4 months, I knew how capricious this is, how accidental it all is. It was Cobra from my last job that paid for all this. God knows what would have happened to me otherwise. I was able to be treated by the best doctors in the best places and get the right drugs. And I knew, as I knew when I was sitting in an inner city hospital in an emergency room, surrounded by my new North Philadelphia neighbors, waiting for a blood transfusion, I knew that two-thirds of the people in that waiting room with me had no health insurance. We have the craziest, most scattershot, most illogical system of medical provision in the developed world. And I've covered healthcare in other countries. I've written stories on the German system and the Dutch system and the French system and the British system and the Mexican system. And the way we give healthcare, it lands us up with this crazy system where we spend twice as much as anybody else on the planet and don't get as good results. So if I could change one thing, it's a pretty titanic thing to change, but more universal access, less Hail Mary passes from 100 yards out with the most expensive machines in the world, trying to help and save people who are likely not going to be saved or helped, while allowing other people's illnesses to get worse and more expensive every moment that we don't treat them.
I'm just curious, how did you know that those people didn't have health insurance?
Well, a lot of them were probably on Medicaid or some form of supported health care. But poor people use emergency rooms as their primary care providers. They don't have primary care doctors, they don't have insurance. And so what they do is they wait till something gets really bad and then they go to the emergency room,
Right.
where the provision of their care is exponentially more expensive than if we just gave them insurance. So the incentives are all in the wrong place. The incentives for the preservation and maintenance of good health, the incentives for avoiding the most expensive, most dangerous maladies, catching them early and treating them early, all the incentives and all the payments are all in the wrong place. So you end up with a system like that.
Yeah. Hmm. Are you ready to lighten things up with the Thriver rapid fire
Oh, okay.
questions? All right, here we go. Beach, desert, or mountains?
Desert.
Ooh, surprise. I
I
love
love
it.
austere, beautiful places. I'm not a beach person. Mountains are okay, but I love deserts.
What's your favorite desert in the US?
Well, I guess the Mojave. It's a phenomenal place.
Yeah, I lived in Southern California for a long time. So, all right, Beach Boys, Beatles, or Rolling Stones?
Um, that's tough because I admire them all in various ways. I'd have to say Beatles because their contribution to pop music is so enduring that we'll still be singing their songs 100 years from now, and we won't be singing Brown Sugar 100 years from now.
What is one word that best describes you?
Durable.
Before you die, what is the last song you want to hear?
God only knows. Even though I didn't pick the Beach Boys.
It's a great song. What about the last meal you want to eat?
Wow. Uh, I want a complete, and I mean a complete platter of my soul food, Puerto Rican food. Um, pork chops,
What does that consist
mashed
of?
plantains with pork cracklings, yellow rice and beans, um, fried green plantains. Just, yeah, I mean, then I'll go to heaven with a good meal in my stomach, if that's where I'm going.
Right? That's how I feel about it. Like I'm gonna go out and have a great meal. What about the last person or people you want to see?
Well, I guess though I love my children with a desperate, ferocious power, the last person I would have to say goodbye to is my wife, who I have been in a relationship with since I was a teenager, and I'm now on Medicare. So
Oh
that's a
my
long march.
goodness.
That's a long march.
Wow. That is. Wow. What about the last words you will speak?
Uh, I did my best, and I love you all.
Oh. And aside from Cancer U, what's one resource that you would recommend for cancer patients and caregivers? And please tell everyone how they can get in touch with you and find your podcast.
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter at Ray Suarez News. And the podcast is easily found wherever you get your podcasts. And gosh, if you just search my name, you'll not only find my cancer podcast, the things I thought about when my body was trying to kill me, but you'll also see my other two series that are up right now. One on downward mobility in the United States called Going for Broke, and a weekly series on international news called World Affairs. And they're all, as they say, wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm excited. I'm going to listen to them.
Good,
I'm
good.
a total podcast junkie. I have the premium subscriptions to Stitcher and Wondery, and I have the Google. I have them all. I have them all. I love podcasts.
Well, I was late to the form. I was a skeptic. I thought it was going to destroy radio, and I may still be right, but I am doing podcasts now. So,
You have to. You're a journalist and you have a great
oh,
voice.
thank you.
Yeah. Ray, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story.
It's been a pleasure. Good luck, everybody, and hang in there.